Hello, welcome to another episode number 6 of the series Camille Flammarion 2024. It is a great pleasure to have you all here. So I wish you good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are or whatever time you are watching these episodes of the series. So you are all welcome here. We do apologize for this program was supposed to be broadcast last Sunday, the 2nd of June, but unfortunately we had agenda problems, a clash, and then we had to postpone it until today. So I welcome you all. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming our dear friend Rafael Caldas. He'll be talking to us about haunted houses. So, for those of you who don't know Rafael was born and raised in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And since his childhood, he has been a member of the Spiritist Center Antonio de Aquino, as well as the Spiritist Center Leon Denis. So, Rafael has been living in London for quite a while, and he's a member of the Spiritist Society of London, a very active one. He hosts some programs you can also watch, and he's a trustee of the British Union of Spiritist Society, a very active one. So it is a great pleasure to have here with us Rafael Caldas to talk about haunted houses.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Munir. Thank you, Elsa. Sure, you're in the background now for this invitation. Third year that we are continuing this series, and I'm super happy to participate now this year when we are studying a bit more about Camille Flammarion. And I have to be honest, I had not studied Flammarion before this initiative. And I was very curious about this book because of the title. I think the title already got my attention. I think Flammarion was very clever here because this is one of the topics that's probably the most common one around the world when you talk about mediumship, when you talk about spirits. It always comes back to haunted houses and haunting experiences. So I'm super happy to be here and talk a little bit about this book with all of you. Let me share my screen. Let's get going. As I was saying, most of us will have stories, right? Either ourselves or have heard from friends or family or have seen in movies. As I said, this is such a topic that is present everywhere all the time. Very, very common. But I tell you what, the history, these stories about haunted places, it's not something that just started from the last century. It's not something that Camille put a bit of a focus on because it only started to happen in the last century or so. No, ghost stories are universal, are ancient. In fact, a Babylonian dated 3,500 years before Christ, describing an exorcism, is probably the earliest depiction of a ghost that we have in history. In the 1st century, there was a Roman author, Pliny the Younger. He recorded that a bearded apparition rattling chains was haunting a house in Athens, Greece. So it's not something that, it just started now. As we go back in time, we see that in reality, throughout history, you always had this relationship with spirits and haunted places and these unusual events and phenomena happening. Different groups were assigned the explanation behind these haunted places to different sources. Here in Britain, for example, the folklore would link all of these cases to the existence and the work of fairies instead of ghosts. Fairies in many cultures were thought to be like invisible beings that operate in a different dimension to ours, but they would exist alongside ours, and they'll be able to kind of go back and forth into these two. And they would be the ones responsible for doing these mischievous happenings and tricks, but not only in UK folklore. You see, like in many religions as well, we will have some sort of explanation or image or a figure that would be responsible for those things, right? In pre-Islamic Arabian, for example, and later on in Islamic cultures, we had the figure of the jinn or the genie. What are the genies? They would be like the invisible beings that would live on Earth alongside us, the humans, and they would occupy vacant homes and empty places. Very often, they would be associated to events that would torment humans, make them behave badly, like demons, like possessive spirits. Anyways, I think what I mean is that wherever you are, if you go in the past, and regardless of who you are in terms of culture, there will always an element of haunting places, and people were always sure that they were not alone. So I want us to take a second to reflect and to remember. Have you experienced any situations like this, where strange occurrences couldn't be explained? Were associated to ghosts, haunted spirits? What was the explanation behind, if there was one? If you have not had an experience yourself, 100% sure you have heard from someone else, a friend, family member, neighbor. This subject is present everywhere. Let me move on. There you go. Right. Now, why was Camille Flammarion writing about this, about haunted houses? Flammarion, as we know, is an astronomer, and it's part of almost an extension of his research to understand how the universe works. As a scientist and as an investigator, he wanted to research this phenomena that had always been present around, but more recently started to intensify and receive more attention, receive more investigation efforts. So what did he do? He started to accumulate throughout his research those different cases, the explanations behind that, what he was experiencing, and put together the books and articles, present them, open to criticism. He got close and together with Kardec and other spiritist authors as well. And he started to ask people. Throughout his publications, he started to ask people to send to him and share with him their case, their stories. So a description, documents, testimonies of these occurrences. His approach was that before trying to explain what was behind these cases, he wanted to look at them and verify these facts. See what were people saying, what were the commonalities between them. More importantly, what kind of witnesses were together with that? Couldn't be verified if those cases were real or not. In this specific book, he was purely concerned with the reality of the occurrences. How many cases? What kind of cases? What was the description around them? What were the people suffering? How did it start? Did it stop? Why did it stop? And so on. So you start to see here his scientific mind working. First, we observe the facts. We admit their existence so we can investigate them further, which to me relates closely with my studies of Gabriel Delan last year. Right? Last year, I was in charge of the book, The Materialized Apparitions of Living and Dead, where Delan was describing the multiple times of mediumistic phenomena. Here, we have Camille describing different types of haunted experiences. So you see a bit of a parallel between the two. Today, I'm going to try to get us through his thought and his structure in the book. There's a lot of items for us to reflect. There's a lot of cases. He focused this book a lot in bringing examples, descriptions, names, stories. And I'm going to try to bring some of those cases for us to take a look together. From the beginning, Camille brought a quote that caught my attention straight away. And because I think it synthesizes his mindset in looking into haunted houses. Let's see. There you go. Let's read together. Laplace reasoned exactly when he wrote in his analytical theory of probability. We are so far from knowing all the agencies of nature and their various modes of action that it would be unbecoming in a philosopher to deny the phenomena simply because they are inexplicable in the present state of our knowledge. Only we must examine them with an attention which is the more scrupulous, the more difficult it appears to be to admit them. This is quite a strong philosophical stance, right? He's bringing Laplace wording behind the analytical theory of probability so we can, from a very pragmatic perspective, look into those cases and those facts, right? For me, that's already setting the tone around this book. This specific book, it was a moment in Camille's life where he was openly challenging the materialist ideas. It was a period of his life where he was dedicated to investigating phenomena and especially reflecting upon the justifications that the materialists gave for such phenomena. Through reasoning and experience, he would refute their explanations. But pay attention, he was receiving them, he was reflecting upon them, and he was saying, okay, these are the questions, these are the answers that they're giving. Do they make sense? Do they cover everything? It's interesting that he starts the book bringing up a very public dialogue that he had with another Camille, Camille Saint-Saëns, which was a friend of his that was a materialist who believed in the faculties of the brain as opposed to the soul. So these two opposing thinkers would challenge one another, but with the interest of uncovering the truth. They wanted to understand the reality, investigate those cases. So we know that during the second half of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s, there was a lot of attention given to mediumistic phenomena. And we see that in the works of many people. We see that in Kardec, we see that in Gabriel Delan, we see that in Flammarion, Conan Doyle, William Crookes, and etc. Flammarion is proposing that we study further the unknown behind these occurrences. In the same way, pay attention to how he puts it. I think it's brilliant. In the same way that he's saying that astronomy was a science that came from astrology, that chemistry was a science that came from alchemy. He's proposing that the psychic science will be born out of the occult. But that can only happen if you investigate, if you test, if you experiment, if you study. Back to the beginning of the book, Flammarion brings cases of people who receive some sort of communication about someone who has just died miles away from them. In many cases, they had no contact with these people for years. People that die all of a sudden in accidents, etc. And Camille Saint-Saëns shares his view that all of those occurrences, they are products of our brains, like the ability that we have within our brains to influence, to send a message, to send the waves, some sort of a telepathic connection to influence the other. Flammarion starts counter-arguing, saying that it has a few cases there that it would be very unlikely that that would be the reason, right? In his research, he received thousands of letters from places all over the world experiencing those strange situations. Let's take a look at an example. Right. Flammarion received this case from a mariner from Brest, which is an area in France. Let's read. From 1870 to 1874, I had a brother employed at the arsenal of Fuzhou in China as a fitter. A friend of his, a mechanic, who came from the same town, Brest, and was also employed at a futsal arsenal, came one morning to see my brother at his lodgings and told him the following story. My dear friend, I am much upset. I dreamed last night that my little child, died of croup on a red eiderdown. My brother ridiculed his fears, spoke of nightmares, and in order to dissipate the impression, invited his friends to lunch. But nothing could divert him. For him, his child was dead. The first letter he received from France after that event was from his wife, announcing the death of their child from croup after great suffering. And strangely enough, on a red eiderdown, on the very night of the dream. On receipt of this letter, he showed it, weeping, to my brother, from whom I heard the story. So much detail to be a coincidence, right? Have the place, the time, the night of death, the reason of death, the details about the red eiderdown. There's a lot of things that to allow ourselves to leave to imagination. The question would always be about maybe the mariner was lying or the brother was lying. But the thing is, Camille received so many stories. What would people gain from just making it up? Like, he's literally received thousands of stories. And in many cases, these stories would come with witnesses, people that were public, people that were connected to serious jobs, connected to investigation, scholars. So there wasn't really a motivation for them to make this up. In many cases, they would not even be identified. So there wasn't about receiving a spotlight or anything. Many of these stories were very sad and very upsetting. So when people were questioned about them or had to tell about them, it made them really sad. So why would they want to relive that as well? So again, these questionings plus the sheer size of the number of stories that he received make us a bit more trustworthy in terms of that. This case is just an example of a dream, right? There were many, many other cases. This one, also the case of a dream. Let's take a look. I pray you will excuse my indiscretion and importunity. Having this day read your article in Le Journal, I have remembered the following fact, which I can certify as being true. I take the liberty of reporting it to you. My grandfather, now deceased, who used to be a district surveyor, had retired. He descended one morning from his room and said, "Last night I dreamed a strange dream. Our cousin appeared to me and told me he had just died and asked me to accompany him to the notary, where he would communicate his will to me." As my grandfather was saying this, the postman brought a telegram announcing the death of this cousin, whose illness had been unknown to us. We were very much struck by the coincidence. The subsequent reading of the will of MJP astonished his family, and did not leave any of his goods to those he had loved. The heir was even accused of a forgery. Had MJP, when he appeared in the dream, wanted to call attention to the strangeness of his will? If we read these lines, you will, illustrious master, be able to draw a conclusion. Je vous en prie, Paul Bustier. Again, another case where I brought these two because they're quite short and we can take a look at them very quickly, but the coincidences just seemed a bit too forced, right? The same day, the night before, you have a dream with a cousin, you didn't know the cousin had any illnesses or anything, the details around the will going to the notary, so it's just too much detail to be put as a coincidence. These are all provocations. I think that is a good way of looking at it. Flammarion is simply stating facts, occurrences, anecdotes that he receives. He opens the book in chapter 1 with 13 cases like this related to communications from people that have passed. When investigating psychic phenomena, we have one scientific issue. we don't have the means of replicating experiments 100%. We don't have the full details of the conditions that were needed for that to happen, right? But that should not stopping us from investigating it. In the same way that we could not replicate the eruption of a volcano, or the formation of a cloud, the passage of a meteorite, those didn't stop us from developing the theories, studying things, understanding them, and so on. So the same provocation comes from Flammarion. Even though we cannot replicate those exactly, we should still investigate how these work. So what we can do is observe and experiment. Now, does that mean that we accept everything that is told to us? Does that mean that every source of information is credible? No, we know that. One thing that is core to Spiritism is that being careful to take all precautions so we can validate message received or phenomena described. In fact, when we are talking about mediumship, yes, the first item, the first rule is that we need to rule out all other possible explanations for that specific occurrence. Before we say this is mediumistic, we need to be sure that it could not have been caused by anything else. Of course, Flammarion aligns to that. Flammarion says, there are real haunted houses. There are also spurious ones. There are genuine banknotes. There are also spurious ones. There are truthful people. There are also liars. There are honest people and rascals. To reject without examination all that has been said about haunted houses would be as foolish as to accept everything without examination. Old traditions and proverbs must not always be despised. He roams about like a spirit in torment. Is so ancient a saying that it is lost in the mists of antiquity. Where did it come from? What is its origins? Not all accounts must be rejected, despised, or suppressed. It is not all error, illusion, or imposture. Here, as elsewhere, if we wish to learn, we must examine things without prejudice. So, the provocation, the level of provocation that Camille Flammarion is bringing to us is incredible, is immense. He is telling us, let's not just ditch things, ideas, new investigations, occurrences lightly. Let's look at them. Yes, there might be issues, there might be problems, there might be lies, but the sheer volume and how far back it goes, it must indicate something is happening. So let's look at it. Let's look at it without prejudice. Flammarion goes on to his next chapters, now exploring the actual place. He goes into detail of explaining day by day what happened in specific cases that was sent to him, published in different magazines, newspapers, and books, and so on. And I brought one here. Again, forgive me by how wordy it is, but I brought one here for us to take a look together. It's the one that is probably the shortest, so we could take a look at it together. This one happened in Port Glasgow in the UK, and this is how it goes. In April 1864, considerable excitement arose amongst the people resident in Scots Lane, Port Glasgow, owing to noises which were heard in an apartment occupied by Hugh McArdle, gardener, and his family. The knockings were heard almost nightly for about 2 weeks, and after the rumor had spread through the town, large numbers of men and women assembled in the lane from about 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock every evening. The stair, lobby, and apartments were often crowded, but the police occasionally passed through the lane to ensure order. I visited the house to investigate the matter and obtained the assistance of Mr. James Figan, grocer. While waiting in the room for the commencement of the noises, Police Sergeant James MacDonald and a constable came in. I told Sergeant MacDonald my object, and as he was anxious to expose the trick, if such it were, he consented to assist me. The knockings commenced about 9 o'clock and continued for more than an hour. The first sounds were similar to what is made by scratching on rough boards, then knockings, as if made with a heavy hammer on the floor under the bed, which was situated immediately above the outer stair. Sergeant MacDonald and I took a candle and went below the bed, exactly over the spot where the sounds were proceeding from. Mr. Fagan stood in front of the bed. J. Fian Struther and a number of persons were in the room besides the constable. We informed that knocks had been given as affirmative or negative answers to questions. We asked a good many questions, requested that 3 knocks be given for yes and 1 for no. The knocks were rapid and loud, and often given before the question was quite finished. During any pause in the question, the knocks seemed to be to the air. There is an I luck about the house. I whistled that tune, and the knocks became still louder and accompanied my measure, and so on. So it just gives us an idea. You go on to explain that the knocks would even continue the melody of other songs. And in this specific case, where we see a number of people, we have policemen involved trying to find out and discover the trickery. This, by the way, this case was published on a report on spiritualism of the London Dialectical Society in 1873. After the description, there's a document with 3 witnesses signed, dependent witnesses signed, explaining and confirming that everything that was described they saw. They are not connected to the people, they were not linked to the occurrence, but they were there and they saw it. Why? Right. So if we receive such detail around this, knowledge around what's happening, description about that, why would we just assume, look, no, it doesn't happen, it's wrong, and then just push it aside? No, if something like that is happening, and we saw this happening around the world, why not investigate and understand what's behind it? Let's see another one. This is also quite a famous one because there's a lot of material around this case online, and was spread in many different sources. This is the case of the owner that inherited the castle in 1867. When they moved there, they noticed some extraordinary incidents with noises, blows, and that happened during some time. Then they stopped, and then in 1875, they started again. They came back, and then they become something very frequent. So the owners of the house started a diary, and from October 1875, every day they recorded and described what was going on in a castle. And there was multiple types of occurrences that were happening constantly. They go on and say that the ground, first of all, in October when it started, the ground around the castle was covered in snow. Once they started to investigate, and they could find no footprints coming through the snow into the castle. They also made sure that they secretly tied threads in every entrance of the castle to make sure that there was nobody came in, and they could not find any of those threads broken. So from October 75 until January 76, they experienced a lot of stuff. They saw moving of objects, from small objects like candles, candlesticks, books, onto big objects like sofas, tables, armchairs. There were rasps, there were knocks, there were stampedes, there were sounds of scratches, people going up and down the stairs, people running, keys. You'll be able to see keys turning, and coming off the keyhole. Voices, just like the other case in the book, this one had also the confirmation from multiple witnesses. One of them was a clerical instructor to the son of the family that was in the castle living with the family during that period, that later on became the parish priest of Normandy in France. Again, a lot of confirmation. This parish priest that confirmed all the details, he went on to say, look, I lived there. In fact, all of these things happened. They happened with me in a room, just by myself, as well as with the rest. Pretty much confirmed everything that had been described. Yeah, Flammarion shares multiple stories in detail about things that happened that could not be explained. But then now we start to see a bit of a shift, right? Because what we see is a bit of a shift in terms of from physical to intelligent phenomena. We saw that in Port Glasgow, the example of Port Glasgow, there was a description of communicating with whatever was behind that phenomenon, right? They were making questions and say, look, knock this number of times for yes, sometimes for no. So the second one, what I'm calling here interactions with Coco, that's just to remind me of the case in the book. This one is around France as well, in a town called, or the city called Languedoc, where the people that were living in the house where the phenomenon was happening, they got used to it. They got used to having this invisible companion around, and they gave them the name of Coco. But to the point that started to ask that force for help. One day they asked that force behind the phenomenon to let them know once a letter had arrived, because there was a very special, important letter that they were expecting. And they asked them, please let us know by 2 knocks when the letter arrives. And it did. Third one I'm bringing here is the turning spoon. And this one is another case as well. The family was experiencing extreme disturbance in a different house. There's a lot of noise coming from the house, especially at night. A lot of noise coming from the kitchen, the rattling of pans, plates being bashed. Then one night, they decided to make an experiment, and they left a note behind a glass saying, if this is a spirit and if this is from the other side, can you please be quiet, so to not disturb the people living in the house that are trying to sleep. And then they put this note under a glass, had their tea or coffee, and they put the spoon that they used for the coffee on that glass. And what happened was they saw the spoon started to turn inside the glass. And it did that for 2 hours, which was quite quiet in comparison to, bashing things around. Flammarion was more interested in making them, back in that time, question things. Here, he was indicating that it seemed that there's an intelligence element, exterior, outside the people that were involved, perhaps a spirit, perhaps something else. But these reflections brought up another question. Could this phenomena be the result of forces that were impregnating the rooms, the objects that were coming from the people that were there, people that had been there before? He is saying that they were far from being able to explain it, but they should accept it as possible theories. So again, he was not getting those cases and examples and going straight on to explain, look, this is what's happening because of a medium, because of this. No, he's saying, look, those are the different ideas behind the explanation of these things. Maybe it's a spirit. Maybe it's the person that has the ability to control those things, that is describing what's happening. Maybe the environment absorbed the forces and energy from people, from situations that they were related to, and that is causing the effect. There was still another question, which was if these things were related to the specific moment of death of individuals. in the moment of death, we have specific abilities, and then we therefore can send these brain waves and this energy further and cause these things. We see, and I think that's the moment where I saw I had a bit of a question mark when I was reading the book in terms of, but is Flammarion trying to explain and bring understanding, or is it just purely presenting things and facts? And it is presenting things and facts, right? We see some distance between the explanations that we were getting from Deland, for example, and Kardec, from what Flammarion is presenting. Because this is now coming from our understanding, right? We know that these manifestations in the literature from Spiritism, there's explanation around, yes, it is possible that there are manifestations from the dying. We understand that now when we are passing away, there's a bit of a disconnect, the loosening of our ties between the spirit and the body. And therefore, our spirit's a bit more free to do things. And in many cases, it is possible even to distance itself and communicate and appear and things like it is possible. There is a possibility. We also know very well that there is a possibility that somebody who has already passed through the intermediate of a medium can make a specific phenomenon happen, either by moving things or changing things or materializing things or by saying, right, or whatever it is. We know that this is also a possibility. In the same way that manifestations of the living also are possible. There's a lot of explanations around magnetism, on people that are able to influence other people, telepathic communication. So all of these things, we know that they are possibilities. The fourth one, the psychometrics, right? That's the other thing that Flammarion also brought it up. Could this be a possibility? And this is something that comes even more recently from the books from Francisco Xavier, that yes, some objects in some areas, some rooms, they retain the energy, the memories, that of situations and people that were there. And a medium that has that type of sensitivity can, by touching it, by being in that environment, by reconnect, can see, can feel, can perceive what is imprinted, let's say, in those items or places. Again, these four things here, I'm just bringing that something additional to the book, right? It's something from a spiritist perspective. We know that these things are possible with the explanation that we got from Kardec, Chico Xavier, etc. But Flammarion was not interested in answering these things in the book. He was interested in bringing facts, bringing cases, and provoking us to think. That is what he had in his mind. I'm going to bring here a quote that I took from Gabriel Deland. Gabriel Deland used this quote in his book from Poincaré, which is a mathematician, that says, "To doubt everything or to believe everything, these are two equally convenient solutions, which one and the other exempt us from thinking." Which I think Flammarion would be very happy to see associated with this book as well. As I said, I went in a journey with this book, right? Because I admire Flammarion a lot now for the courage that he had at being part of the movement, spiritualist and spiritist movement. I have been close to Kardec. But he wrote this book very faithful to the mentality of an investigator from a scientific perspective. He was not explaining things from a spiritualist perspective. He was, as a scholar, as an investigator, he was bringing facts to surface for us to look at. That's all. And I saw some criticism to Flammarion and into this book, but now I am looking from a different perspective. On chapter 13, he brings different explanations and opinions that had been presented so far to explain the phenomenon. And he doesn't just bring the explanation from a spiritualist perspective. What he does is he brings explanations from some lines of thoughts. He brings the pushback from materialists and some other lines of thoughts. And he brings other cases that, again, will not either actually, because he doesn't conclude. He always brings cases that will present situations that are not explained by those positions, those theories, right? He brings cases that explain that the different aspects of our own psychic and physiology will play a role in some phenomena. He will bring other cases showing that the content that is brought in a specific case cannot be associated to the person who is giving it. They don't know about what's being exposed, right? He brings up cases of mediums that seem to be the cause of the phenomenon themselves, through the power of suggestion, when they are in trance. But when we look at it, there's content that comes from some of these mediums that cannot be associated to the knowledge that they have. Right? The challenges and the theories that associate phenomena to the people involved, they do not explain everything. Right? Through history, since ancient times, most philosophical schools, they always bring this figure, this element of the fifth element as part of nature, right? As long as much as we have matter, as we have, the four elements, there's always another element. There's an intelligence, there's a creative one that surpasses, goes beyond matter and beyond our physical senses. We can't fully understand this yet, but it is all around us, right? He's saying that there is something that our science is still not ready or prepared to explain. And we need to evolve. We need to evolve. We need to push science from a psychic perspective so it looks into these things, these phenomena, experiments them, and so on, so we can move our science towards a direction where we can explain those things. Yeah. When he was publishing this book in the 20s, that was when we were starting to use and develop a bit more the understanding of the Hertzian waves, the electromagnetic waves. So imagine now that we are talking about our mind and our brain abilities of creating waves that we are not yet fully prepared to understand. How about the waves that our minds operate in? Need to be discovered. The epilogue of the book starts with this phrase from Camille, which is, I think it's, again, a very provocative phrase. The unknown of yesterday is the truth of tomorrow. That's how he opens his conclusion, his epilogue. Then he goes on to say, we must study everything, discuss everything, analyze everything without prejudice. I said a few times that I went through a journey with this book being a spiritist myself, I was expecting he would bring explanations related to mediumship, but that is not the purpose of this book. I went through most of the book focused on the factual elements that he brought. And towards the end, only towards the end, I realized that his goal was to make us doubt our convictions. All of us, anyone, not talking about spiritists. And that is why I concluded the reading very inspired. It turned. I was just looking like a very factual, and then I said, oh, wait a minute, there's something here. He's making me question things, even from a spiritist perspective. Because the way he's writing things and describing things, even though he was close to the spiritist teachings, he is not bringing that up. He's putting possibilities out there that we know that have been already explained from a spiritist perspective. You see, us spiritists usually have a posture of like respect other people's opinions and faith, and we don't try to convince anyone of what we know. People have their own journeys, people have their own time, and it's how it should be. But I think we bring that posture, use that posture to move us away from a very healthy engagement, dedication to expand our understanding of spiritual life, of mediumship, to openly talk about it, to openly invite criticisms and opposing opinions to what is being revealed, to what's being proposed. But in reality, it's just by creating this dialogue, by expanding how we understand things, mediumship and so on, and listening to the criticism that we're going to get, so we can go back and say, how does the knowledge resist, let's say, or face the criticism and questions that come towards it? How are we going to progress and evolve? It's like it's science. Notice that I say science. Without that, nowadays we do have some research lines that connect, medicine and spiritism. Every so often something new comes up in terms of research. There's documentaries coming up. But I would use this talk, these moments that we're having here, to leave a provocation to all of us, but especially to the spiritist groups. The provocation is, how are you deepening our understanding of spiritual life and the mechanisms of mediumship? How are you pushing the boundaries of what we know, of what we understand, of how we do things? How are you becoming familiar with the phenomena? How are you becoming familiar with mediumship? That's something that surrounds us every day. We should expect resistance, right? Just like reading this book, it brings us to clarity just how much resistance scientific knowledge faces throughout history. So we should expect resistance. That will force us to be more careful, to be sure about things, to try things before we bring them forward. But it should not stop us. And that's how I'd like to close, leaving this inspired provocation by Flammarion. And I for sure have a lot to think about after reading this book in terms of how I'm approaching things and what kind of initiatives I'm proposing and getting involved. It feels like there's more work that should be done. Anyways, that was it. Thank you very, very much. It was super nice to be with you again. And we'll see each other again soon. Bye.
Hello, Rafael. Thank you so much for your nice presentation. It's been very, very inspiring, as usual. Another book by Flammarion, packed with not just the information compiled in a very nice and interesting way, but also reports of cases of haunted houses that actually are still happening nowadays, and people should look at them and inspired by them, to go and study spiritism in depth. So thank you very much, Rafael, for your brilliant presentation. So now let's go to the announcements. So on the 7th of July, we will have here with us in another episode of the Camille Flammarion series, our dear friend Faye Waddington. So she'll be talking to us about the wonders of heaven on the 7th of July, 7 p.m. British Summer Time. So looking forward to having Faye with us here. Also, we want to announce that the Spiritist Center for Peace holds a study meeting every Wednesday, 12 noon London time. And in this study, we have the opportunity to study in depth the book Heaven and Hell, and also the Gospel According to Spiritism, both books by Allan Kardec. Then on Saturdays, 10:30 a.m. London time again, another online course, which is the Medium's book. And this course is coordinated by Guilherme Dias, Charles Kemp, and myself. So you are all invited to join us. Here we have, the code for Zoom. Also, the Spiritist Society of London holds meetings on Tuesdays, a study online, 7 p.m. in London. So you can also join the study group, and the Zoom coordinates here, the meeting ID and also the passwords. And finally, we want to thank Kardec Radio for allowing us to use the studio so that we have this opportunity to bring to you the series about Camille Flammarion, as you did in the previous years, about Gabriel Delanne and Leon Denis. So we are very, very grateful to Kardec Radio for sharing this to their studio with us. So that's what we had for today. I thank you all very much for being here with us, and hope to see you all in basically a month's time with the Faye talking to us in another episode of the series about Camille Flammarion. So thank you very much indeed, and see you all soon. Bye-bye.